Confessions of a Divorced Mom. Part 1, The Weight of Silence. Chapter 1, A House of Empty Echoes. It was strange how the quiet in a house could feel so heavy, pressing down like a blanket made of all the things I tried to forget. My mornings began in a silence that lingered, stretching into every corner, filling the rooms that once thrummed with a different kind of noise. I suppose that silence is what happens when laughter, arguments, whispers, and even the sound of another breathing are suddenly absent. The emptiness felt almost alive, like an unseen presence lurking in every space that had once been shared. I remember the first morning after the divorce was finalized. I had woken up before the sun, the darkness outside matching the void inside me. I wandered around the house like a ghost, unsure of what to do with my hands, my thoughts, my day. I could still see the imprint of his body on the side of the bed, the dent in the couch where he used to sit. Each object in the house seemed to carry a memory, a weight that I could not bear to hold but could not bring myself to let go of either. The kitchen was the worst. It held the smell of coffee we used to make together, the scent of Sunday morning pancakes, the sound of spoons clinking in mugs. Now, I sat at the table alone, staring at the steam rising from my cup, watching it dissipate into the air, much like the life we once shared. I thought about those mornings where we'd stand side by side, not saying much but existing together. I never imagined that the absence of those moments would be so profound. In the first days, I couldn't bring myself to touch anything that reminded me of him. His mug remained in the cupboard, his jacket hung behind the door, and his favorite book sat on the shelf beside the armchair. It felt like removing them would be admitting to a reality I wasn't ready to face, that he was gone, that he wasn't coming back. I would walk by these things, knowing I should pack them away, but my hands would tremble, refusing to complete the task. The nights were the hardest. There is something about the darkness that amplifies loneliness. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks that ran across it, wondering how long they had been there, how long I had been too distracted to notice them. My thoughts wandered to him, wondering if he was struggling with this new life, too, or if he had already moved on to something better, something that didn't include me. I would turn over to the empty side of the bed, wishing it could fill itself with the warmth I had grown used to. I kept a blanket by the window, wrapped myself in it when the silence became too unbearable, and watched the street below, the lives of others carrying on as mine had come to a halt. I envied the lights in the windows, the shadows that hinted at families still together, still whole. There were nights when I would drift into dreams where things had not broken, where we were still a family, waking up together, making plans for a future that now seemed so foreign. Eventually, I started to notice how the absence of his presence changed the house. The living room became a place I could rearrange to my liking. The music I played no longer had to fit his tastes. I painted the walls in a color I would have never chosen before, a soft shade of blue that felt like a fresh start, even if it was only a small one. These changes were not triumphs, they were survival. It was the only way I knew how to push against the weight of the loneliness that filled every room. But as much as I tried to move forward, the memories were stubborn. They clung to me, following me into every space I occupied. I'd find his face in the reflection of a mirror, a shadow of him passing through the hallway. I kept telling myself that it was normal, that it was all part of adjusting, but deep down, I wondered if I would ever truly adjust to this new reality. How does one get used to the feeling of being split in half? How does a heart learn to beat on its own again after beating in time with another for so long? I found myself sifting through old photographs one afternoon, my hands lingering over the edges of the glossy prints. There were pictures of us, of the life we'd built together, smiles that had felt real, arms that had once held so much warmth. I saw our wedding day, the day our daughter was born, the vacations, the anniversaries. I saw us building a life I thought would last forever. But those images felt like artifacts of a life that belonged to someone else, someone more naive, someone who believed that love alone could be enough. The hardest part of those early days was the realization that I had lost not just him, but also the version of myself that existed with him. I had become Mina, the woman who built her world around someone else, who lost sight of who she was without that anchor. Now, I was a different Mina, a stranger even to myself, trying to piece together an identity from the fragments left behind. There were moments when I would look in the mirror and hardly recognize the woman staring back. She had dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights, her hair pulled back carelessly, her skin pale and drawn. I used to care about such things, about looking put together. But now, it felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, not when my mind was busy wrestling with questions that had no answers. I wondered if this version of me would ever find joy again, if I could rediscover the spark that had been snuffed out. Every night, as I lay alone in the darkness, I would close my eyes and try to remember what it felt like to be whole. I would try to imagine a future that wasn't filled with loss, but with possibility. It wasn't easy, hope had a way of slipping through my fingers like sand. But somewhere in that darkness, in the echoing silence of the house, I felt a faint flicker, a whisper of something that might one day grow into light. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there. A seed buried beneath the ruins, waiting for the right time to sprout. For now, all I could do was tend to it, nourish it with the tears I refused to shed during the day, and wait for the moment when it would finally bloom. Chapter 2: The Weight of Silence. I thought I understood loneliness before, but it wasn't until I lived in a house where my own breath seemed to echo back at me that I truly grasped its weight. It is one thing to be alone, but another to feel the emptiness as a presence, a heaviness that settled in the corners of every room, curled up in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The silence felt like it was speaking to me, saying all the things I had been trying so desperately to avoid thinking about. In the weeks that followed the final papers, I found myself drifting through the days. There was a rhythm to my solitude that I began to recognize, a pattern that emerged out of the chaos. Mornings were the hardest, when the bed felt colder than ever, and I woke up with an aching in my chest that had no name. I would sit at the kitchen table, staring out the window as the sun rose over the neighborhood, painting everything in a soft, indifferent light. I watched as life outside my window continued uninterrupted, as if my world hadn't just crumbled. I would spend hours in that chair, clutching a mug of coffee that went cold long before I finished it. The sound of birds chirping outside the window used to be a comfort, but now they seemed to mock me with their insistence that life continued to move forward. I envied them, their small, simple world that was free from the tangled mess of human emotions. I envied the way they didn't have to think about what came next, how they didn't have to struggle with the questions that kept me awake at night. During the afternoons, I forced myself into the routines that I once took for granted. Laundry, dishes, the small tasks that had once been shared between us. Folding clothes became a ritual of sorts, each piece of fabric a reminder of how things had changed. His clothes were no longer mixed with mine, and I caught myself missing the absurdity of sorting through mismatched socks, or the way his shirts always seemed to end up inside out in the wash. Now, it was just my clothes, my life, my mess to clean up. I often found myself opening the closet where I had packed away the remnants of him. His shirts, still faintly smelling of the cologne he always wore, the books he never finished reading, the photo albums that captured a life that now felt like a story belonging to someone else. I would sit on the floor in front of that closet, pulling out one thing at a time, running my fingers over the fabric or the faded photographs, trying to understand where it had all gone wrong. How something that had felt so solid, so real, could vanish, leaving only the echoes of what used to be. Some afternoons, I would walk through the empty rooms, letting my fingers trace along the edges of the walls. I wanted to understand how these spaces had shifted without him, how the air felt different, thicker, like it was holding onto the memories I couldn't shake. I would find myself standing in the doorway of our daughter's room, feeling the weight of her absence too, knowing that she was trying to adjust to her new world, split between two homes. I wondered if she, too, felt the silence pressing in on her, if she missed the sound of her father's voice the way I sometimes caught myself missing it, even when I didn't want to. As the days slipped into weeks, I tried to find distractions. I immersed myself in cleaning, scrubbing every surface until my hands were raw, as if I could erase the history embedded in the walls. I rearranged the furniture, moved the couch to the opposite wall, changed the curtains, anything to make the space feel new, to strip away the reminders of what had been. But no matter how much I changed, there were some things I couldn't remove, like the faint scent of him that lingered in the fabric of the couch, or the memory of his laughter that seemed to replay itself in the corners of the room. One day, I decided to tackle the garden. It had become wild in the months leading up to the separation, an overgrown tangle of weeds and forgotten flowers. We had always planned to fix it together, to create a space where we could spend quiet mornings drinking coffee, watching our daughter play. But that vision, like so many others, had crumbled into nothingness. So, I took to the task alone, digging through the dirt, pulling up weeds with a ferocity that surprised me. It was as if each stubborn root was something I needed to rip out of my soul, something that had been clinging to me for too long. Hours slipped away in the garden, my hands dirty, my back aching, but it felt good, almost like progress. I planted new flowers, their colors bright against the dark soil, a small attempt to bring life back into a space that had grown desolate. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a reminder that things could grow even after they had been uprooted. As I watched the new blooms take hold, I wondered if the same could be true for me, if I could find a way to plant myself in this new reality and start again. Yet, despite my efforts to move forward, the nights remained unforgiving. There was something about the darkness that seemed to draw out every doubt, every regret, every fear that I managed to keep at bay during the daylight hours. I would lie in bed, staring into the blackness, feeling the vastness of the space beside me, a void where he used to be. I would clutch the pillow, pretending it could fill the emptiness, but it only made me feel more alone. I kept a journal beside my bed, filled with half-written thoughts and unfinished sentences. I would write in it when the loneliness felt unbearable, scrawling out confessions that I couldn't say aloud, not even to myself. I wrote about the anger I still felt, the resentment that bubbled up when I thought about how he had left, about how he had moved on while I was still trying to find my footing. I wrote about the fear of never being enough, of failing as a mother, of not knowing how to rebuild a life I hadn't planned to be living. Some nights, I would sit by the window, letting the cool air brush against my face, staring out at the stars that seemed so distant, so indifferent to the turmoil inside me. I thought about all the stories we used to tell our daughter about the stars, about how they were wishes waiting to be made. But now, they just seemed like distant lights, reminders of a world that kept spinning even when mine had stopped. I wished I could tell myself that it would get better, that time would heal the wounds, but those words felt empty, like the platitudes people said when they didn't know what else to offer. All I knew was that each day was a battle, a struggle to hold on to the small pieces of myself that hadn't been shattered. Each morning was a choice, to get out of bed, to keep moving, to find some semblance of hope amidst the wreckage. The silence was still there, weighing on me, but in that weight, I began to sense something else, too, a strange kind of resilience, a stubborn will to survive. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something close. A flicker of determination, a promise to myself that I would find a way through this, even if I had to do it inch by inch, day by day. So, I held on to that flicker, even when the darkness felt overwhelming, even when the silence seemed too much to bear. I held on, and somewhere in the depths of that quiet, I began to hear the faintest whisper of my own voice, the part of me that hadn't been silenced, that was waiting for its turn to be heard. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, this silence could be the start of something new. Chapter 3: Pieces of the Past. There is a strange comfort in routines, in the way they can make the days feel predictable even when everything else is uncertain. In the weeks after I first settled into this new life, I began to cling to them, cleaning the house, tending to the garden, keeping myself busy with small tasks that gave structure to the empty hours. But no matter how much I filled my days, there was always the ache of missing something, like a phantom limb. Some mornings, I would find myself standing in front of the attic door, my hand hovering over the knob. I had avoided the attic since the separation, avoiding the memories it held, the boxes we had packed away together, each one a time capsule of our life before everything fell apart. But that morning, something in me cracked open, a need to face those remnants head-on, to confront the past that lingered in the shadows of this house. Climbing the creaky steps to the attic felt like stepping into another time, where dust motes drifted lazily through beams of sunlight filtering through the small window. The air was heavy with the smell of old cardboard and forgotten things, like a museum of our life together. I knelt on the wooden floor, pulling open the first box, and felt my breath catch in my throat. Inside, I found our wedding photos, sealed away in an album with yellowed edges. I held the album in my hands, tracing the embossed cover with my fingertips. The photos inside were faded, but the memories they carried felt vivid, almost painful. I turned each page slowly, letting the images wash over me, our first home, the honeymoon we spent by the ocean, the smiles that seemed so genuine, so certain of the future. We had been so young, so full of belief that our love could withstand anything, as if the world couldn't touch us as long as we had each other. As I flipped through the album, my mind drifted back to that day when we promised forever. I could almost hear the music playing softly in the background, the way the sun dipped low in the sky as we exchanged vows. I remembered the way his hand felt in mine, warm and steady, and how I had believed, with every fiber of my being, that we were meant to last. It seemed so distant now, like a story belonging to someone else, someone I used to be before life showed me how fragile those promises could be. I sat there for what felt like hours, lost in the past, until the sunlight shifted and I realized that the day had slipped away. With a deep breath, I closed the album and set it aside. I moved to another box, one filled with our daughter's baby clothes, each piece small and impossibly soft, carrying the faintest hint of her scent. I held a tiny pink onesie against my chest, feeling the weight of all the moments that I had wanted to freeze in time, the first steps, the first words, the way her eyes used to light up when she saw us both in the same room, a family whole and unbroken. It was harder, I think, to look at these things than it was to look at the photos of him. There was a guilt that came with this separation, a gnawing fear that I had somehow let her down, that I had failed to give her the stability she deserved. I wondered how she would remember this time, if she would think of me as strong for making this choice, or if she would only remember the sadness that lingered in our home, the nights when she found me staring at the ceiling with tears that wouldn't stop coming. I wanted so badly to believe that she would be okay, that she wouldn't carry this weight with her into adulthood, but that belief felt like a fragile thing, easily shattered by my own doubts. I pushed the box of baby clothes aside and reached for another. This one held the little things we had collected during our travels, postcards from the places we visited, seashells from a beach in Maine, a snow globe from our trip to Paris. Each item was like a piece of our puzzle, fragments of a life that I couldn't seem to put back together. I picked up a seashell, holding it to my ear like I used to do when we were young, when we believed you could hear the ocean trapped inside. Instead, all I heard was the silence of this empty room, the way the attic seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to change. I closed the box, feeling the weight of the memories settle over me like a blanket, too heavy to lift. I knew I couldn't put these things back where they came from, not yet, but I wasn't ready to let them go either. So, I left the boxes half open, a quiet surrender to the past that I couldn't escape, and made my way back down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. That evening, I tried to lose myself in the familiar routine of cooking dinner, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot on the stove. But my mind kept drifting back to the attic, to those photos and the life they represented. I realized that I had spent so much time trying to forget, to push those memories down where they couldn't hurt me, but maybe that was the problem. Maybe, in trying to bury the past, I had buried a part of myself along with it. I found myself returning to the attic often after that, drawn to those old boxes like a moth to a flame. Some days, I would only look at one photo, or hold a small trinket in my hand, letting the memories wash over me without fighting them. Other days, I would linger longer, letting myself feel the full weight of the loss, the heartbreak, the regret that came with it. It was painful, but in a strange way, it felt like healing, like I was beginning to come to terms with the woman I had been, and the woman I had become in the wake of it all. And in those moments, I began to understand that grief is not just the loss of a person, but the loss of a future you had envisioned, the loss of a version of yourself that you thought you would always be. I had to mourn those things too, the dreams that would never come true, the life I had planned out so carefully that had unraveled before my eyes. I had to mourn the idea of us, of a love that had seemed invincible but had proven to be as fragile as anything else in this world. The days turned colder as autumn settled in, and I watched from the attic window as the leaves changed colors and fell from the trees. I thought about how beautiful the change was, even though it meant the end of something. I wondered if there could be a kind of beauty in my own transformation, in the way I was learning to live with the pieces of my broken heart. I didn't have all the answers yet, hell, I didn't even have most of them, but there was a strange comfort in the not knowing, in the idea that maybe I didn't have to have everything figured out right now. In those quiet moments, I began to see a sliver of hope, a possibility that maybe I could find a way to build something new from the wreckage. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would still be days when the weight of it all would threaten to crush me. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way through this darkness and into a light that I had almost forgotten existed. So, I kept going back to that attic, kept sifting through the memories that had once haunted me, learning to see them not as ghosts but as a part of the story that had led me to this moment. And slowly, very slowly, I began to believe that I could carry those memories without letting them define me, that I could hold on to the past while still making space for whatever might come next. It was a fragile hope, like a seed planted in rocky soil, but it was enough to keep me going. And in the end, maybe that was all I really needed. Chapter 4, Shattered Reflections. There's a kind of pain that sneaks up on you, that wraps itself around your heart without you even noticing, until one day you wake up and realize that breathing hurts. I used to think that time would dull the ache, that eventually, I'd learn to live with the sharp edges of my broken marriage. But time, it turns out, doesn't always heal. Sometimes, it just teaches you how to carry the hurt, how to tuck it away where no one else can see it, even if it's still there, pressing against your ribs. I spent my days trying to be a good mother, the kind of mother who hides the cracks in her foundation, who paints on a smile because she believes that's what her child needs. But there were mornings when I couldn't avoid my own reflection, when I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes seemed older, her face drawn with worry lines that hadn't been there before, her smile thin and brittle, as if one wrong word could shatter it into pieces. I started avoiding mirrors altogether, as if not seeing my reflection could somehow make the truth disappear. But the thing about running from your own image is that it always finds a way to catch up to you. It's there in the glass of a storefront window, in the chrome of a passing car, in the shadow that falls across the kitchen floor when you're least expecting it. And every time, it brings with it a rush of memories I'd rather forget, memories of the woman I used to be, the woman who believed that love could last forever. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, the one that used to reflect a happier time. It had been a wedding gift, a tall, elegant frame that I'd once imagined keeping in our home for decades, a symbol of the life we were building. Now, it felt like an intruder, a reminder of all the things that had slipped through my fingers. I stared at my own face, trying to remember when I had changed, when the light in my eyes had dimmed. I wondered if he ever thought about that, if he ever looked back on those years and felt even a flicker of regret. I reached out and touched the surface of the glass, letting my fingertips trail over the cool, smooth surface. It felt almost as if I could reach through it, back to a time when everything was simpler, when we used to spend Sundays in bed, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about the future as if it was a story we could write together. But the glass held firm, reflecting only the woman I had become, a stranger with shadows under her eyes and shoulders hunched with the weight of too many unspoken words. As I stood there, I felt a swell of anger rise up in me, sharp and unexpected. It wasn't just anger at him, though there was plenty of that. It was anger at myself, for believing that love could protect me from the hurt of the world, for thinking that I could somehow be enough to keep our family together. I had spent so much time blaming him, resenting him for all the things he took from me, my trust, my sense of security, my hope for a life that no longer existed. But in that moment, I realized that I had also been punishing myself, holding on to a guilt that I couldn't quite name. I clenched my hands into fists, feeling the burn of my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to break something, to shatter that mirror into 1,000 pieces. But instead, I sank to the floor, leaning against the cool wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was as if all the emotions I had tried so hard to keep locked away were spilling out, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. I pressed my face into my hands, feeling the hot tears spill over, and for a long time, I just let myself cry. They weren't the silent, controlled tears that I had learned to shed late at night, when my daughter was asleep and I thought no one could hear. These tears were raw, guttural, the kind that left you feeling hollowed out, like you had emptied yourself of everything you had been carrying. I cried for the love I had lost, for the dreams that had crumbled into dust, for the version of myself that I had buried under layers of duty and fear. I cried for all the ways that life had turned out differently than I had imagined, for the loneliness that crept into my bones in the quiet hours before dawn. When the tears finally slowed, I forced myself to look back at the mirror. My face was a blotchy mess, my eyes swollen, my hair falling in tangled strands over my shoulders. But there was something else there too, something softer in the set of my mouth, a glimmer of resilience that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't quite hope, no, I wasn't ready for that yet, but it was something like acceptance, a fragile sense that maybe I could survive this, that maybe I didn't have to be perfect to find my way through the darkness. I got up slowly, wiping my cheeks with the back of my hand, and took a deep breath. I decided then that I would no longer hide from my own reflection. I would face it, even when it hurt, even when it reminded me of all the things I had lost. I would let myself grieve, not just for the marriage that had ended, but for all the little pieces of myself that I had left behind along the way. I started a new routine after that. Each morning, I would stand in front of that mirror and look at myself, really look. I would acknowledge the tiredness in my eyes, the lines that spoke of sleepless nights and quiet sorrows. And then, I would remind myself that this was not the end of my story. I would remind myself that even though the life I had once imagined was gone, there was still a life waiting for me, one that I could build piece by piece, as slowly as I needed to. Some days were harder than others. There were still mornings when I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, when the sight of the empty space beside me in bed felt like a punch to the gut. There were nights when the loneliness crept back in, settling like a cold weight in my bones, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house around me. But I kept going, one step at a time, letting myself feel whatever came, without pushing it away. And slowly, I began to see the cracks in the mirror not as flaws, but as evidence of survival, of the ways I had managed to hold on when everything else was falling apart. I began to believe that maybe there was strength in those imperfections, that maybe I didn't have to be whole to be worthy of love, to be worthy of rebuilding a life that felt like my own. It wasn't the kind of strength I had imagined when I was younger, when I thought strength meant never breaking, never faltering. This was a different kind of strength, one that came from knowing that I could break and still find a way to keep going. The days grew shorter, the air turning crisp with the promise of winter, and I wrapped myself in sweaters and thick socks, finding a strange kind of comfort in the small rituals of the season. I watched the first snowfall from the living room window, the flakes drifting down in a quiet, steady dance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something that might have been peace. It wasn't a perfect peace, and it didn't come easily. But it was there, fragile and fleeting, like a single breath of warm air in the cold. And as I stood there, watching the snow blanket the world outside, I realized that maybe I could learn to live with the cracks, with the parts of myself that would always carry the marks of what I had been through. Maybe I could learn to see beauty in the way the light filtered through the broken edges, casting shadows that spoke of resilience, of a heart that had learned to keep beating even when it seemed like it couldn't. It was a quiet revelation, one that I held close to my chest like a secret, like a small, tender hope that had found a way to survive the storm. Chapter 5: Faded Wedding Rings. It's strange how memories work, how they slip into your mind when you least expect them, like unwanted guests at a dinner party. You think you've locked them away, stuffed them into a dusty corner of your mind, but they find a way out, creeping into the light when you're not looking. I suppose that's how it was with me. I had convinced myself that I had moved on, that the past was nothing more than a series of closed doors. But then, one chilly afternoon, I found myself sifting through an old box in the attic, and suddenly, all those doors swung wide open. The attic was one of those places I had avoided since the divorce, a space that felt too cluttered with remnants of a life I no longer recognized. but I had decided that it was time to face it, to confront the mess I had been ignoring for so long. So, I climbed the creaky stairs, the air growing cooler as I reached the top, and switched on the single light bulb that dangled from the ceiling. Dust motes swirled in the dim glow, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever I might find. At first, I busied myself with sorting through old clothes, toys that my daughter had long outgrown, boxes of holiday decorations that I hadn't bothered to take down last year. It was easier that way, focusing on the small, insignificant things. But then my fingers brushed against a box I hadn't seen in years, its edges frayed, the lid slightly askew. I hesitated, a sense of foreboding settling in my chest. I knew what was inside. I had packed it myself, back when I still believed that if I could just put everything away neatly, I might be able to keep my life from falling apart. With a sigh, I lifted the lid, and there it all was, the mementos of a marriage that had once been my whole world. Wedding photos, love letters, ticket stubs from concerts we had gone to together, the pressed flower from our first anniversary. It all lay there, frozen in time, as if it had been waiting for me to return. My hands trembled as I picked up a photo, the edges worn from years of handling. There we were, smiling under a canopy of autumn leaves, his arm wrapped around my shoulders, my head resting against his. We looked happy, so sure of the future we thought we would share. I barely recognized the woman in the picture. I sat back on my heels, the photo clutched in my hand, and let the memories wash over me. I remembered the way he used to make me laugh, the sound of his voice drifting through the house, the warmth of his touch on a lazy Sunday morning. I remembered the way we used to talk about growing old together, about the home we would build, the trips we would take, the life that seemed so full of promise. And for a moment, I let myself miss him, let myself grieve for the man I thought I knew. But the memories didn't stop there. They kept coming, relentless, like a river that had broken through a dam. I remembered the fights, the silences that stretched on for days, the way he had pulled away from me bit by bit until there was nothing left between us but empty space. I remembered the night I found out about the other woman, the way my world had collapsed around me, the way I had begged him to stay even when I knew it was already over. I remembered the way he had looked at me, not with love, but with something that resembled pity, and how that had hurt more than any words could have. I pressed my palms against my eyes, as if I could push the memories back into their box, but it was too late. They spilled out around me, mingling with the dust and the cold air of the attic, filling the space with a weight that I couldn't seem to lift. I felt like I was drowning in them, in all the things I had tried so hard to forget. I thought about the woman I had been back then, desperate and afraid, clinging to a version of love that no longer existed. I thought about how small I had felt, how lost, how utterly alone. For a long time, I just sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that no longer belonged to me. And then, slowly, I began to pack everything back into the box. I folded the letters, the photos, the tokens of a love that had once seemed unbreakable, and placed them carefully inside. I didn't know what to do with them yet, whether to keep them or throw them away. But I knew I wasn't ready to let go completely, not yet. There was a part of me that still needed to hold on to those memories, even the painful ones, as if they might help me understand how everything had gone so wrong. I closed the box, sealing the past back inside, and carried it down the stairs, my legs unsteady under the weight. I placed it on the top shelf of the hallway closet, out of sight but within reach, a reminder of a story that I was still learning how to tell. And as I stood there, staring at the closed door of the closet, I felt a strange sense of relief, like I had taken the first step towards something new, even if I didn't yet know what that something was. That night, I lay in bed, the house quiet around me, and thought about how far I had come since the divorce. I thought about the nights I had spent crying myself to sleep, the mornings when it had taken every ounce of strength just to get out of bed, the days when I had wondered if I would ever feel whole again. I thought about the way I had learned to find small joys in the everyday, my daughter's laughter, the warmth of the sun on my face, the way a good book could make me forget everything else for a little while. And I realized that maybe that was what healing looked like, not a grand epiphany, not a sudden return to happiness, but a slow, quiet process of picking up the pieces, of learning how to carry the weight of your own story without letting it crush you. Maybe it was about finding a way to live with the questions that would never have answers, about learning to forgive yourself for all the things you couldn't change. As I lay there in the dark, I made a promise to myself, a promise that I would keep moving forward, no matter how long it took, no matter how many times I stumbled. I promised myself that I would not let the past define me, that I would find a way to build a future that felt like my own. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that it might be possible. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the blankets wrap around me, and listened to the soft sound of my daughter's breathing through the thin walls. It was a small comfort, that sound, a reminder that even in the midst of everything I had lost, I still had something to hold on to. And as I drifted off to sleep, I held on to that thought, like a lifeline, like a thread of light in the darkness. Chapter 6, Whispers of Regret. If anyone had asked me what I feared most after the divorce, I might have lied and said it was starting over. Or maybe I would have said it was the financial uncertainty, the anxiety that came with balancing bills and the sudden single-income household. But the truth was something much simpler and far more terrifying. It was the fear of being alone. For years, my life had been filled with noise. Not just the everyday sounds of a marriage and a household, like the clinking of dishes after dinner, the hum of the TV as we half-watched a show, the murmur of voices that filled the rooms, but a kind of noise that came from never really having to sit with myself, never having to face the silence. Even in the worst of times, when my ex-husband and I barely spoke to one another, there had been a presence in the house, a shape beside me in bed, a shadow moving through the hallways. When he left, that shape disappeared, leaving behind a kind of quiet that I wasn't prepared for. In those first weeks, the emptiness of the house pressed in on me, a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I filled the silence with distractions, music that played softly through the living room speakers, the drone of podcasts that kept me company while I folded laundry, the hum of the washing machine in the background. But no matter how many sounds I tried to layer over the silence, it was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for me. There were nights when I lay awake, the bed feeling too big, too cold without the warmth of another body beside me. I would reach out, almost out of habit, and my hand would brush against empty sheets. In those moments, the loneliness felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rustle through the trees outside my window, wondering if this was what the rest of my life would feel like, one long stretch of quiet, interrupted only by the sounds of my own thoughts. And yet, somewhere in the middle of all that quiet, I began to discover something I hadn't expected, an awareness of myself that I had lost somewhere along the way. I started to notice things about myself, small things that had gotten buried beneath the routines of marriage and motherhood. I realized that I liked the way the morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting a soft glow over the table where I sat with my coffee. I found that I had a preference for soft jazz in the evenings, that I liked the way it filled the room without demanding my attention. I learned that I enjoyed taking long walks around the neighborhood after my daughter had gone to bed, the cool night air a balm against the day's worries. I began to cherish those moments, the ones that were mine alone. It was a strange feeling, this tentative enjoyment of my own company, like finding a long-forgotten part of myself hidden beneath the rubble. I would sit at the kitchen table, a cup of tea warming my hands, and feel a sense of calm that I hadn't known I was capable of. The house would be quiet around me, but instead of feeling like an absence, it began to feel like a space I could fill with whatever I wanted. Of course, there were still days when the loneliness was too much, when I longed for someone to share the small details of my day with, to tell me that I was doing okay. I missed the comfort of another person's presence, the easy way we used to move around each other, our lives intertwined in 1,000 little ways. I missed the feeling of being known by someone, the reassurance that came from being seen. But those days were becoming fewer, the edges of my loneliness softening with time, the quiet turning into something I could sit with instead of something I had to flee from. There was a kind of power in that, I realized, in learning how to be alone. It wasn't the kind of strength that came with defiance or resilience, the way people talked about when they imagined a woman finding herself after a divorce. It was quieter, more subtle, like finding a steady rhythm in a world that had felt chaotic and unpredictable. It was the ability to sit with my own thoughts without needing to drown them out, to look in the mirror and see someone I recognized staring back. I began to carve out small rituals for myself, little acts of care that helped me remember who I was. I bought myself flowers for the kitchen table, not because I had anyone to impress but because they made me smile when I walked into the room. I took up journaling again, writing down my thoughts late at night, pouring out the things I couldn't say out loud. I started running in the mornings, feeling the cold air sting my cheeks, the rhythm of my feet on the pavement a steady beat that grounded me. In the quiet of those moments, I found a kind of solace that I hadn't expected. I found a version of myself that I thought I had lost, someone who wasn't defined by the roles she played, by the wife she used to be or the mother she had to become. I found a woman who was learning how to stand on her own 2 feet, who was learning how to love herself in a way she hadn't known she needed to. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, days when the weight of everything pressed too heavily on my shoulders, when the house felt like a prison instead of a sanctuary. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wishing for the comfort of a warm embrace, the reassurance of a voice in the dark. But slowly, I began to realize that I was stronger than I had given myself credit for, that I was capable of building a life that felt like my own. I think that's what healing looks like, or at least what it looked like for me, not a grand transformation, but a gradual process of finding myself in the spaces between the pain, in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. It was about accepting that the loneliness wouldn't disappear overnight, that there would be days when it hurt more than others, but that I could learn to live with it. It was about discovering that there was beauty in the quiet, that there was a strength in being alone that I had never known before. As I look back now, I realize that those moments of solitude, those hours spent learning to be with myself, were some of the most important of my life. They taught me that I could survive, that I could build something new out of the ashes of what I had lost. They taught me that I was enough, even when I was on my own. And in that realization, I found a kind of freedom that I had been searching for all along. Chapter 7: Navigating Guilt and Motherhood. There's a certain kind of guilt that lingers after a divorce, especially when you're a mother. It's a persistent ache, a whisper that creeps in during the quiet moments, questioning every decision you make. I think I carried more guilt than I knew what to do with in those early months, guilt for my daughter, for the broken family she never asked for the way I couldn't give her the picture-perfect life I once dreamed of. I wrestled with it every day, trying to convince myself that I was doing my best, even when it never felt like enough. The guilt came in waves, crashing into me when I least expected it. It hit me in the mornings, when I packed her lunch and tied her shoes, wondering if she noticed how my hands trembled on the days I was too tired to fake a smile. It caught me off guard when I tucked her into bed, her small arms wrapping around my neck as she fell asleep, trusting that I could keep her world safe. I wondered if she felt the empty space where her father used to be, if she missed the sound of his voice, the way he would lift her onto his shoulders and make her laugh. I blamed myself for the nights she woke up crying, reaching for me in the dark, as if I could somehow shield her from the loss that lingered between us. I wondered if she could sense the tension in my voice when I spoke to her, the way my smile sometimes faltered when I was too tired to pretend that everything was fine. I worried that I had somehow failed her, that my decision to leave her father had made her life harder in ways she couldn't yet understand. There were moments when the guilt was so overwhelming that I thought I might drown in it. I would stand in the doorway of her room, watching her sleep, and feel the weight of everything I couldn't give her pressing down on my chest. I would think about the home we used to share, the one where her laughter echoed through the hallways, and wonder if she missed it too. I knew she did, even if she never said it, even if she tried to be brave for my sake. I could see it in the way she clung to her stuffed animals, the ones that used to sit on the bed she shared with her father and me. I tried to compensate for the loss in the ways I knew how, by filling our weekends with trips to the park, by baking cookies in the kitchen and letting her sprinkle flour everywhere, by reading her extra bedtime stories even when my voice grew hoarse. I wanted her to know that I was still there, that I loved her more than anything, even if our world had changed. But deep down, I worried that my efforts weren't enough, that no amount of playdates or treats could fill the void that my decision had created. I remember one afternoon, standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom, looking at my own reflection. My eyes were red from crying, my face puffy and swollen with the weight of emotions I couldn't quite name. I thought about the woman I used to be, the mother who believed she could give her child the world, and I wondered what she would think of me now, this version of me who was trying so hard to hold everything together, even as she fell apart inside. It's strange how quickly you become a stranger to yourself, how the person you thought you were slips away when life takes a turn you never saw coming. I had always believed that being a good mother meant being strong, that I had to put on a brave face for my daughter, to shield her from the pain I carried. But there were days when I couldn't hide it, when my tears spilled over and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom, hoping she wouldn't hear me crying. I hated those moments, hated the way they made me feel weak and unworthy of the role I had been given. I thought I was supposed to have all the answers, to know how to comfort her when she was scared, to make her believe that everything would be okay. But there were times when I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. Motherhood is a fragile thing, I realized, a balance between protecting your child and letting them see your humanity. I worried that my struggles would make her feel unsafe, that my vulnerability would somehow make her think she couldn't rely on me. But I also began to understand that pretending to be perfect wasn't what she needed from me. She needed me to be real, to show her that it was okay to feel sad, to feel scared, to feel all the things I had been trying so hard to hide. I tried to forgive myself for the ways I had fallen short, for the mistakes I had made, for the times I had lost my temper when the weight of everything became too much. I tried to remind myself that I was still learning, that I was allowed to be imperfect, that being a good mother didn't mean never making mistakes. It meant loving her fiercely, even when I didn't have all the answers. It meant showing up for her every day, even when I felt like I was failing. There were small victories, moments when I felt like I was doing something right. I remember the way her face lit up the first time I took her to the beach after the divorce, how she ran toward the water with arms outstretched, laughing as the waves lapped at her feet. I remember the nights when she would fall asleep in my arms, her breath soft and steady against my chest, and I would hold her a little longer, trying to memorize the feeling of her warmth, the weight of her trust. In those moments, I found a kind of peace, a reassurance that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't failing her after all. I began to see that our life together, imperfect as it was, had its own kind of beauty. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was real, and it was ours. And slowly, I learned to let go of the guilt, to trust that love would be enough, even when everything else felt uncertain. Motherhood is messy, complicated, full of contradictions and doubts. But it's also full of grace, of small, quiet moments that make the hard days worth it. It's waking up in the morning and choosing to try again, even when you're not sure how. It's finding the courage to forgive yourself, to keep moving forward, to believe that you're doing the best you can with what you have. I know now that I will never stop feeling guilty for some things. There will always be a part of me that wonders if I could have done better, if I could have made her life easier. But I've also learned to accept that guilt as part of the process, as part of what it means to love someone so deeply that their happiness becomes your greatest wish. It's the price you pay for caring, for wanting to give them the world, even when you can only offer them a part of it. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being a mother isn't about being perfect, but about being present, about showing up even when it's hard, about letting them see that you're still learning too. It's about finding the strength to face your own doubts, to look your guilt in the eye and tell it that it doesn't define you. It's about choosing love, again and again, even when the path is uncertain. And in that choice, I began to find my way forward, one imperfect step at a time. Chapter 8: The Loneliness of Long Nights. There is a particular kind of loneliness that creeps in after a marriage ends. It isn't just the absence of a partner in the house, or the silence that fills the rooms that once echoed with conversations, with shared laughter, and with arguments that somehow made you feel less alone. It's the kind of loneliness that you carry with you everywhere, a shadow that clings to your footsteps, whispering in your ear during the moments when you think you might finally be okay. I had never understood what true loneliness felt like until those nights after the divorce, when the house was still and my daughter slept, when there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock to keep me company. It felt as though the world had shrunk around me, like everything I knew had been folded into a small, tight space where there was no room to breathe. The bed felt colder, the darkness thicker, and the night stretched on longer than I ever imagined possible. I found myself lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things that had led me to this place. I would trace the cracks in the plaster with my eyes, imagining them as the faults in my own heart, the places where my life had split apart. I wondered if I had made the right choice, if leaving him had been the right thing for me, for my daughter, for the life I wanted to build. But in those hours, the questions only seemed to multiply, growing tangled in my mind like a knot I couldn't untie. There were nights when the memories came back to me with such vividness that I almost thought I could reach out and touch them. I would close my eyes and find myself back in our old home, hearing the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his voice drifting through the hallways. I could almost feel the weight of his arm around my shoulders, the way he used to hold me close in those early years when everything seemed so simple, so possible. But then I would open my eyes and remember where I was, alone in the dark, with only the shadows to keep me company. I tried to distract myself from the emptiness, filling my nights with tasks that would make the hours pass faster, folding laundry, rearranging the furniture, reorganizing the kitchen cabinets. I became obsessive about cleaning, scrubbing the floors until my hands ached, wiping down every surface as if I could erase the memories embedded in the walls. But no matter how spotless the house became, I could never seem to make it feel like home. It always felt like a place in between, a waiting room where I sat with my loneliness, hoping that someday, it would let me go. Some nights, I would sit on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the sky as it shifted from deep indigo to the softest shades of dawn. There was something about those quiet hours before the world woke up that made me feel like I was the only person left alive, like the universe had forgotten about me entirely. I would listen to the wind rustling through the trees, to the distant hum of cars on the highway, and feel a strange kind of comfort in the thought that, somewhere out there, life was still moving on, even if mine felt like it had come to a standstill. I missed having someone to talk to, someone who could share the silence with me without needing to fill it. There were things I wanted to say, thoughts that felt too heavy to keep inside, but I had no one to listen. I couldn't burden my daughter with them, she was too young to understand, and it wasn't her job to carry my pain. So I carried it alone, letting it build up inside me like a pressure that I couldn't release. Sometimes, I imagined what it would be like to have a friend who could sit beside me on those long nights, who could listen without judgment, without trying to fix anything. But those thoughts only made the loneliness sharper, cutting deeper into my chest. I never thought I would be one of those people who felt the need to write in a journal, but after a while, I found myself picking up an old notebook and scribbling down my thoughts in the dark. It wasn't much, just a few lines here and there, words that I couldn't seem to say out loud. I wrote about the things that kept me awake, about the fears that gnawed at me when the lights were off, about the ache that settled in my chest whenever I thought about the future. It was messy and disjointed, but it was the only way I knew how to make sense of everything I was feeling. Writing became a kind of lifeline for me, a way to give form to the shapeless emotions that swirled inside me. I would pour my thoughts onto the page, letting the ink soak up the things I couldn't bear to keep inside. And in those moments, I felt a little less alone, as if the words themselves were listening, as if they understood the things I couldn't say. It wasn't enough to make the loneliness disappear, but it gave me something to hold on to when the nights felt too long to endure. But there were also nights when the weight of everything became too much, when the silence felt like it might swallow me whole. I would curl up under the covers, pulling the blankets over my head as if I could hide from the darkness, from the thoughts that chased me through the quiet. I would lie there, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, trying to remind myself that I was still here, still breathing, even when it felt like I was fading away. Loneliness has a way of making you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. It strips away the distractions, the noise, until you're left with nothing but the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are. And in those long, sleepless nights, I began to see parts of myself that I had buried for years, parts that I had hidden behind the roles I played, behind the mask of the perfect wife and mother. I saw the fear, the doubts, the dreams I had put aside for so long that they had become almost unrecognizable. I began to realize that the loneliness I felt wasn't just about missing my ex-husband, or about wishing for someone to fill the empty space beside me. It was about missing the person I used to be, the woman who believed she could shape her own destiny, who wasn't afraid to chase after what she wanted. I had lost her somewhere along the way, in the compromises, in the sacrifices, in the slow erosion of dreams that I thought would always be there. But as painful as those realizations were, they also became a kind of hope, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, there was still a part of me that could find her way back. It wouldn't be easy, I knew that much, but I began to believe that the loneliness wasn't permanent, that it was a place I was passing through on the way to something new. And in that belief, I found the strength to face another night, to sit with the silence and let it teach me the things I had been too afraid to see. So I carried on, one long night at a time, with my notebook and my thoughts, with the quiet hope that someday, the loneliness would loosen its grip, that I would wake up to a dawn that felt different, lighter, like the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. And until then, I held on to the small moments of grace, the glimmers of peace that slipped through the cracks, reminding me that I was still here, still moving forward, even when the way ahead felt uncertain. Chapter 9: The Garden of Lost Dreams. As the months slipped by, I found myself drawn to the little garden in the backyard. It had once been a vibrant oasis filled with colorful flowers, fragrant herbs, and towering tomato plants, nurtured by my hands and the joy of watching life bloom under the sun. After the divorce, however, it became a shadow of its former self, overrun with weeds, choked by the absence of care. The neglect mirrored my own feelings, once lively and full of potential, now wilting under the weight of grief and loneliness. Standing at the edge of the garden, I could see the remnants of what used to be. The flower beds, once bursting with blooms, were now tangled with stubborn weeds that seemed to mock me with their resilience. I could almost hear the soft laughter of my daughter, Emily, as she picked flowers and ran her fingers through the dirt, her cheeks smudged with earth, her joy palpable. But that joy felt distant now, replaced by a heaviness that settled in my chest every time I stepped outside. I knew I needed to reclaim this space, to breathe life back into the garden and, in turn, into myself. So one morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, spilling golden light across the yard, I made my decision. I grabbed my gardening gloves, a trowel, and a bucket, determined to dig my hands into the earth and resurrect the garden that had once flourished alongside my dreams. As I knelt down, feeling the cool soil beneath my fingers, I was struck by a wave of nostalgia. Each handful of dirt carried memories, whispers of the life I had nurtured here. I began to pull up the weeds, their roots stubborn and entwined, as if they were clinging desperately to the life they had taken over. With every tug, I felt a release within myself, a small but significant shedding of the past. It was cathartic, a physical manifestation of my desire to rid myself of the baggage that had weighed me down. With each weed I uprooted, I recalled the dreams I had buried in the soil of my heart. The dreams of a thriving marriage, of a home filled with laughter and love, of a future that felt as bright as the midday sun. But as the weeds piled high beside me, I also remembered the dreams that were still waiting for me, those that had been silenced but not extinguished. There was a spark within me, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could plant new seeds and cultivate a different kind of life. After hours of labor, my garden began to transform. The vibrant colors of the flowers that still survived started to peek through the roughness of the earth, and I felt a sense of pride blossom within me. I replaced the dead and forgotten with fresh soil, nourishing the ground like a promise to myself that I would not let the past define me. I planted new seeds, sunflowers that would reach toward the sky, herbs that would thrive in the warmth, and flowers that would remind me of the beauty in resilience. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I stepped back to admire my work. The garden, while still in its early stages of revival, bore the marks of my determination. It felt like a reflection of my journey, a beautiful mess, a tapestry woven from threads of hope and heartbreak. I realized that nurturing the garden was more than just an act of reclaiming space, it was an act of reclaiming myself. In the weeks that followed, I continued to tend to my garden with the same love and dedication I once poured into my marriage. I watered the plants, pulled out the weeds, and watched as life began to unfurl in vibrant colors. Each blossom that opened was a small victory, a reminder that even in the aftermath of loss, growth was possible. It was during these moments that I began to understand the importance of nurturing not only the garden but also the dreams I had allowed to fade. The act of gardening became a ritual for me, a time when I could escape into the simplicity of the earth. I would lose myself in the rhythm of digging and planting, feeling the sun on my back and the cool breeze against my skin. It was in those quiet moments that I found a sense of peace, a connection to something greater than myself. The garden became a sanctuary where I could reflect, heal, and allow the pain to transform into something beautiful. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle above, I sat on the porch overlooking my newly revived garden, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over me. I watched the fireflies dance in the twilight, their soft glow mirroring the flickers of hope that had ignited within me. It was a stark contrast to the loneliness I had felt in those long nights of silence. Now, surrounded by the colors and fragrances of my garden, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. With each passing day, I began to invite Emily to join me in the garden. I wanted her to experience the joy of nurturing something, of witnessing the miracle of growth firsthand. Together, we would plant seeds, water the flowers, and chase away the weeds. Her laughter filled the air, a sound I had longed for during my darkest moments. In those shared moments, I found healing not only for myself but for our relationship as well. The garden became a space where we could reconnect, where we could create new memories together. However, there were still moments when the weight of my divorce felt too heavy to bear. As the garden flourished, I would occasionally find myself drifting into thoughts of what could have been, of the life I had envisioned. The ache of missed opportunities and shattered dreams would creep in, but I learned to acknowledge it without letting it consume me. I understood that healing was not a linear journey. It was a dance between embracing the past and forging ahead into the unknown. In time, my garden became a metaphor for my own transformation. Just as the flowers had risen from the dirt, I began to rise from the ashes of my past. I discovered a sense of empowerment in nurturing my dreams, in taking the steps necessary to reclaim my life. The loneliness that had once felt suffocating began to recede, replaced by the warmth of newfound connections and the realization that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I learned to find joy in the small moments, watching Emily dance among the sunflowers, feeling the soil beneath my nails, and savoring the fragrance of fresh basil and mint. Each blossom that emerged was a reminder that life, despite its challenges, could be beautiful and full of promise. My garden became a testament to resilience, a space where I could celebrate the journey of healing and growth. And so, with every sunrise that painted the sky in hues of possibility, I continued to tend to my garden and to my heart. I embraced the beauty of imperfection, knowing that even the most chaotic moments could lead to unexpected blooms. The journey was far from over, but as I watched the flowers sway in the gentle breeze, I felt a flicker of hope igniting within me, a promise that life was still waiting for me, filled with dreams yet to be discovered. Chapter 10: Embracing the Storm. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden hue over the neighborhood. Yet, within me, a storm was brewing, an internal tempest that mirrored the darkening sky. I had spent countless days cultivating my garden and nurturing my relationship with Emily, but beneath the surface, I felt an unsettling tension growing. It was as if the clouds had conspired to obscure my vision of the future, leaving me in a haze of uncertainty. The weather seemed to change on a whim. One moment, the sun would shine brightly, warming my skin and lifting my spirits. The next, ominous clouds would roll in, casting shadows on my heart. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life could shift, how one moment of clarity could be overshadowed by doubt. I had spent so long trying to find stability, to create a safe haven for Emily and myself, but the undercurrents of my emotions threatened to pull me under. One afternoon, after a particularly tense week, I decided to take a walk in the nearby park with Emily. The air was thick with humidity, and the sky was a murky gray, foretelling the rain that would inevitably come. As we strolled along the winding path, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. The laughter of children echoed around us, but it felt distant and surreal, like a scene from a movie I was no longer a part of. I forced a smile for Emily, but inside, I was wrestling with the fear of what lay ahead. The first drops of rain began to fall, gently at first, as if the universe were testing the waters. Emily squealed with delight, spinning in circles as the drops grew heavier, her laughter cutting through my gloom. I watched her, feeling a pang of longing for the carefree days of my youth, when the world seemed boundless and bright. But those days were gone, replaced by responsibilities and heartache that weighed on me like a heavy cloak. As the rain began to pour, I stood still, letting the cold droplets wash over me, embracing the discomfort. In that moment, I realized that I had been running from my emotions, avoiding the very storms that could cleanse me. I was afraid of what it meant to confront my pain, of how it would reshape my identity. But as the rain fell harder, I felt a flicker of determination rising within me. I would no longer hide from the storm, instead, would embrace it, knowing that the only way to move forward was to face the truth of my situation head-on. We sought refuge beneath a sprawling oak tree, its branches providing a makeshift shelter. Emily, still bubbling with energy, splashed in the puddles that began to form at our feet, her joy a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt within. I watched her, captivated by her innocence and resilience. It reminded me that life, like the weather, was unpredictable. There would be sunny days and rainy ones, but each was a part of the journey. As the storm intensified, the sound of thunder rumbled in the distance, a reminder that nature, too, had its own battles to fight. I closed my eyes, allowing the rhythm of the rain to wash over me. The droplets became a symphony, each one a note in the melody of my life. I pictured my struggles, my marriage, my feelings of inadequacy, the weight of raising Emily alone. Each issue felt heavy, but I realized they were also my strengths, shaping me into the person I had become. I could not erase the pain of the past, but I could learn from it. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within, and it became clear to me that just as the rain nourished the earth, my experiences had nurtured my growth. With every challenge I faced, I had the opportunity to rise, to redefine myself and the life I wanted to create for Emily. The rain continued to fall, soaking through my clothes, but instead of shivering in discomfort, I welcomed the chill. I was alive, and with that came the power to change my narrative. I could choose to wallow in despair or embrace the chaos, finding beauty in the storms of life. I looked at Emily, her laughter echoing in the rain, and felt a surge of gratitude wash over me. As the rain began to lighten, I felt the tension in my chest start to ease. I could not control the storms that came my way, but I could control how I responded to them. With each breath, I released the fear that had gripped me for so long. The dark clouds that loomed overhead began to part, revealing patches of blue sky. I took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth and the promise of renewal. Finally, as the rain tapered off to a gentle drizzle, we stepped out from beneath the oak tree, and Emily grinned at me, her cheeks flushed with excitement. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, a silent promise that we would weather the storms together. We walked back home, our shoes squelching in the mud, but with every step, I felt lighter, more at peace with myself. The walk through the rain transformed my outlook. I began to see the potential for joy amidst the chaos, the possibility of starting anew. I would embrace the storms, knowing that they could lead to growth and change. I realized that life's unpredictable nature could be a source of strength rather than a burden. As we neared home, the sun began to peek through the clouds, casting a warm glow on everything it touched. That evening, as Emily settled in for the night, I took a moment to sit in the garden and reflect. The soil glistened from the rain, and the flowers swayed gently in the cool breeze. I marveled at the resilience of nature, how it adapted and thrived, no matter the weather. It dawned on me that I, too, had the ability to weather any storm. In that moment, I made a silent vow to embrace whatever came next, to allow the storms of life to shape me rather than shatter me. I would be the gardener of my soul, nurturing my dreams with the same care I had given my plants. I understood that challenges were a part of life, but they could also be the catalysts for transformation. As I watched the sun set on the horizon, I felt a newfound sense of hope. The clouds may have brought rain, but they also brought renewal. I would cherish the sunny days and the rainy ones alike, knowing that each had its place in my journey. I would move forward with courage, ready to embrace whatever storms lay ahead, trusting that I could navigate them with grace and resilience. The world was vast, and I was ready to explore it, armed with the knowledge that every storm would eventually pass, leaving in its wake a garden full of life. Chapter 11: The Weight of Expectations. With each passing day, the weight of expectations pressed down on me like a heavy cloak. It was not just the expectations from others that weighed heavily on my shoulders, but also the relentless demands I placed upon myself. I often wondered if the constant need to meet these expectations was rooted in my fear of failure or my desire for acceptance. In the quiet moments when I reflected on my journey, I recognized that the pressure was as much a part of my identity as the roles I played in my life. Every morning, I would rise with the sun, ready to tackle the day ahead. But as I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, I often felt a pang of disappointment. The woman staring back at me was someone I barely recognized, someone caught between the remnants of her past and the uncertainties of her future. I had always been the dependable one, the friend who listened, the mother who provided, and the partner who stood strong. Yet, in the midst of it all, I felt like I was slowly losing myself. My mornings became a ritual of self-affirmation. I would mentally list my responsibilities, each one a building block in the tower of expectations I had constructed around me. There was Emily, my brilliant and spirited daughter, who deserved the best version of me. I wanted to be the kind of mother who baked cookies after school, who cheered at her soccer games, and who was always present. But the truth was, my energy often felt depleted, and I struggled to keep pace with her vibrant enthusiasm. In those moments of quiet reflection, I began to understand that the pressure I felt to be a perfect mother was suffocating me. I feared that any misstep would lead to disappointment, not only for Emily but also for myself. I could see the expectations in the eyes of my friends and family, their silent judgments that seemed to linger in the air, amplifying my insecurities. Each comment, each unsolicited piece of advice, seemed to add another weight to the already heavy burden I carried. As time passed, I sought solace in the small moments of joy I shared with Emily. I cherished our evening ritual of cuddling on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, watching her favorite movies. These moments reminded me of the love that anchored our relationship, the bond that transcended the chaos of daily life. But even during those times, the weight of expectations loomed over me, reminding me that I should be doing more, striving harder, being better. One day, while organizing Emily's school supplies, I stumbled upon a collection of letters she had written to her future self. Each letter was filled with dreams and aspirations, a glimpse into her innocent heart. As I read through the pages, I was struck by her sincerity, her simple hopes for happiness and adventure. In those letters, I saw the unfettered spirit I longed to embody but felt I had lost along the way. That evening, as I tucked Emily into bed, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer allow the weight of expectations to dictate my worth. I would learn to embrace my imperfections and understand that my value did not hinge on my ability to meet every standard set by others or by myself. I would strive to create a life that reflected authenticity rather than a facade of perfection. As I lay in bed that night, I closed my eyes and visualized a different path. I imagined myself stepping away from the shadows of expectation, releasing the tight grip I had on my identity. I pictured a life filled with laughter and spontaneity, where I allowed myself the freedom to be vulnerable and open. I wanted to experience joy without the constant burden of achieving perfection. With each breath, I felt the weight of expectations begin to lift. I realized that it was okay to be flawed, to stumble and rise again. I began to understand that true strength lay not in never failing but in having the courage to embrace failure as part of my journey. I would teach Emily that life was not about meeting expectations but about finding joy in the unexpected moments, learning to dance in the rain rather than waiting for the storm to pass. In the weeks that followed, I began to take small steps towards redefining my relationship with expectations. I started saying no when necessary, prioritizing my well-being and that of Emily over external demands. I allowed myself to relish the mundane moments, like lingering over breakfast, painting with Emily, or simply enjoying the quiet of the evening with a book in hand. Each day became an opportunity to embrace authenticity, a chance to shed the expectations that had weighed me down for so long. I also took the time to reflect on my past relationships. I remembered the moments of joy and the moments of heartbreak, recognizing that each experience had shaped my understanding of love and connection. I understood that expectations were often rooted in fear and that true love thrived in the freedom to be vulnerable. I was determined to approach future relationships with an open heart, ready to embrace the messiness of love without the constraints of expectation. As I continued on this journey of self-discovery, I found comfort in the little things, watching the sunrise, planting flowers in the garden, or simply savoring a cup of tea. I learned that these moments were not just fleeting, they were the threads that wove together the fabric of my life. Each one contributed to the woman I was becoming, a woman who embraced her flaws and celebrated her victories, no matter how small. The clouds that had once cast a shadow over my spirit began to dissipate, revealing the warmth of the sun. I felt lighter, freer, and more in tune with myself than I had in years. I knew that the road ahead would not be without its challenges, but I was ready to face them. With every step, would carry with me the understanding that expectations do not define me. I define myself through my choices, my resilience, and my capacity for love. As I watched Emily grow, I hoped to instill in her the same lessons I was learning. I wanted her to know that she was enough, just as she was. I envisioned a future where she felt empowered to pursue her dreams without the constraints of others' expectations. I wanted to be the kind of mother who encouraged her to explore, to make mistakes, and to embrace her own journey. With renewed clarity, I realized that my confessions were not just a reflection of my past but also a commitment to the future I wanted to create for both myself and Emily. I would continue to share my story, to embrace the weight of my experiences, knowing that they were the very things that shaped my identity. I would strive to foster a home filled with love, understanding, and acceptance, a sanctuary where both of us could flourish without the burdens of expectation. And so, I moved forward, embracing each new day with an open heart, ready to write the next chapter of our lives together. Chapter 12: The Art of Letting Go. In the stillness of the night, when the world was wrapped in a blanket of darkness, I found myself reflecting on the concept of letting go. It had always been a complex idea, one that tugged at the very core of my being. As I sat on the edge of my bed, gazing out of the window at the twinkling stars scattered across the sky, I realized that letting go was not merely an act, it was an art, an intricate dance of acceptance, release, and renewal. The past had always held a strong grip on me, like an invisible chain that bound me to memories I often wished to forget. Each recollection carried its weight, a reminder of what once was and what could have been. The nostalgia was a double-edged sword, often bringing warmth to my heart but also a suffocating sense of loss. I had carried the memories of my marriage, my dreams, and my hopes like precious stones in a heavy pouch, unwilling to relinquish them, fearful of the emptiness that might follow. Yet, as I embarked on this journey of self-discovery, I began to understand that letting go was essential for my growth. The more I clung to the past, the more I hindered my ability to embrace the present and envision a brighter future. I recalled the moments of laughter shared with my ex-husband, the joy of building a life together, and the love that had once ignited our hearts. But I also remembered the pain, the misunderstandings, and the gradual unraveling of our bond. There was a time when I believed that holding on to those memories would keep the essence of our love alive, as if preserving them would somehow shield me from the hurt. However, I came to realize that love could exist in the past without needing to dominate my present. It was time to honor those memories while acknowledging that my life had taken a different path. The decision to let go felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping through my hair as I contemplated the leap. Would I be brave enough to jump? The thought of releasing my past filled me with both trepidation and exhilaration. But I knew that in order to embrace the future, I needed to free myself from the shackles of my memories. I began to explore the tangible aspects of my past, photographs, mementos, and keepsakes that had accumulated over the years. Each item held significance, a story of a moment frozen in time. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by boxes filled with relics of my previous life. There were wedding photos, travel souvenirs, and handwritten notes that spoke of dreams shared. As I sifted through them, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me: joy, sorrow, and a profound sense of nostalgia. I picked up a photograph of our wedding day, the sunlight dancing on our faces, the smiles that radiated happiness. It was a moment frozen in time, a symbol of love and hope. I traced the outline of the image with my fingers, allowing myself to reminisce about that day, the laughter, the vows, the promises made. Yet, I also recognized the weight of those promises as they slowly faded away, replaced by disappointment and heartache. With a deep breath, I placed the photograph back in the box. I understood that these memories were a part of me, but they did not define my existence. I didn't need to keep them in plain sight to honor what we once shared. Instead, I could choose to carry the lessons learned, the love experienced, without allowing them to hold me hostage. As I continued to sort through the boxes, I found items that sparked joy, moments of laughter captured in snapshots, souvenirs from vacations that reminded me of adventure. I realized that while some memories were painful, others held the beauty of fleeting happiness. I began to create a separate pile for the things that brought me joy, treasures that would remind me of the light even in the darkest of times. With each item I set aside, I felt lighter, as if each decision to release a piece of my past allowed me to reclaim a part of myself. The act of letting go was transforming into a cathartic ritual, a way of acknowledging the past while making room for new memories yet to be created. I was learning to distinguish between what I needed to carry with me and what could be released. The boxes soon filled with items destined for donation or simply to be tucked away, not as a means of erasure but as a way to honor the journey I had taken. I began to understand that letting go didn't mean forgetting, it meant allowing myself the freedom to move forward without the burden of what once was. As I worked through my belongings, I couldn't help but think about my relationship with Emily. She had become a beacon of hope in my life, a reminder of the beauty that still existed in the world. I wanted to be a role model for her, someone who embraced change and the idea of renewal. I knew that by letting go of my past, I would be better equipped to teach her the value of resilience, of finding strength in vulnerability. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I shared my thoughts with Emily through the warmth of my heart. I envisioned a future where she felt empowered to let go of the things that no longer served her, where she understood that life was a constant ebb and flow, and that change was not something to fear but to embrace. I wanted her to know that it was okay to release what no longer fit, to clear space for new experiences and opportunities. In the days that followed, I felt a shift within myself. I found joy in the mundane, the little moments that had once gone unnoticed. I appreciated the laughter shared over breakfast, the quiet evenings spent reading side by side, and the simple pleasure of watching Emily flourish. I began to approach life with a renewed sense of wonder, eager to embrace whatever lay ahead. As I ventured further into this art of letting go, I also began to explore the aspects of my identity that had been overshadowed by the roles I had played. I rediscovered passions long set aside, the love for painting, the joy of gardening, the thrill of spontaneous adventures. I allowed myself to dream again, to envision a future filled with possibilities. I spent weekends immersed in nature, wandering through parks and forests, breathing in the fresh air. I took Emily along with me, and together we would explore the world around us, marveling at the beauty of every blooming flower, every rustling leaf. In those moments, I felt the weight of my past lesson, replaced by the lightness of being fully present. I understood that letting go was not a one-time act but an ongoing journey. I would continue to confront the remnants of my past, embracing them as part of my story while forging a new path. I realized that each day presented an opportunity to redefine myself, to release the fears that held me back, and to embrace the unknown with open arms. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The stars outside my window twinkled with a promise of hope, reminding me that I was not alone on this journey. I had the strength to let go, the courage to face my fears, and the love of my daughter to guide me forward. With each breath, I reaffirmed my commitment to embracing the art of letting go, knowing that it was a powerful step towards creating a life filled with joy, love, and authenticity. In the depths of my heart, I understood that this was just the beginning, a new chapter in my life where the past would not haunt me, but instead, it would be a cherished part of the tapestry that shaped who I was becoming. I drifted off to sleep with a sense of renewal, ready to embrace whatever the next day would bring, and knowing that the art of letting go would lead me to a future full of promise. Chapter 13, Sundays Without Him. As the sun rose on another crisp morning, I felt a stirring within me, a subtle yet undeniable sense of renewal. The morning light spilled through my window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. I lay in bed, contemplating the significance of the day ahead, feeling as if it was infused with a kind of magic, a promise of transformation. I was ready to embrace the opportunities that lay before me, ready to explore the reflections of my past while setting my sights on the horizon of my future. The morning ritual had become a sacred time for me, a moment of peace before the chaos of the day began. I brewed a pot of coffee, inhaling the rich aroma that filled my kitchen. As I poured the dark liquid into my favorite mug, I allowed myself to pause, savoring the warmth of the cup in my hands. Each sip felt like a small act of self-care, a reminder that I was worthy of nurturing my own spirit. Sitting at the kitchen table, I gazed out at the garden that had become my sanctuary. It was a tapestry of colors, a riot of blooms that reached towards the sky, each petal telling a story of resilience and growth. I had invested my time and energy into cultivating this space, and it was flourishing just as I was. The garden was a reflection of my journey, a testament to the beauty that can emerge from darkness. I spent countless hours digging in the soil, planting seeds of hope and dreams. Each flower that blossomed reminded me that life was cyclical, that there would always be moments of beauty intertwined with struggle. I began to see my own life in this way, a garden of experiences, some bright and vibrant, others dull and withering. But each experience had shaped me, each moment a brushstroke on the canvas of my existence. The morning sun illuminated the path to my garden, casting long shadows that danced along the ground. It beckoned me outside, and I couldn't resist its call. I slipped into my gardening gloves and stepped into the warm embrace of the earth. The soil crumbled beneath my fingers as I tended to the plants, removing weeds that threatened to choke the life from them. In this simple act of nurturing, I felt a parallel to my own life. I was learning to tend to my own spirit, to remove the negativity that had once taken root and replace it with positivity and self-love. As I pruned the bushes, I recalled the many lessons I had learned along the way. The journey of motherhood had taught me the importance of balance, the delicate dance of giving and receiving, of nurturing others while also honoring my own needs. I had often sacrificed my own desires for the sake of my marriage, pouring my energy into someone else's dreams instead of cultivating my own. But now, I was reclaiming that energy, redirecting it towards my own growth. I remembered the countless nights I had spent worrying, fretting over the future, and the guilt that often clouded my thoughts. It was a burden I had carried, believing that I needed to be everything for everyone else. But in the quiet moments of reflection, I recognized the futility of such thoughts. I was not responsible for carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was only accountable for my own happiness and the happiness of my daughter. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the garden in its full glory, I felt a surge of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. I had weathered storms, endured heartbreak, and emerged stronger for it. I was no longer the woman who had hidden behind the shadows of doubt and fear. I was a warrior of my own making, standing tall in the light of possibility. Later that afternoon, I decided to visit a nearby park, a place that had long been a refuge for me. As I strolled along the winding paths, I absorbed the sights and sounds of life surrounding me. Children laughed as they chased one another, their joy infectious. Couples strolled hand in hand, sharing soft whispers and knowing glances. Each scene I witnessed stirred something deep within me, a longing to embrace the fullness of life once more. I found a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree and sat down, allowing myself to simply be. I watched as the leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, their movement reminding me of the inevitability of change. In that moment, I understood that life was a series of seasons, some filled with growth, others marked by decay. But regardless of the season, there was always a beauty to be found if one was willing to look. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden hue across the landscape, I reflected on the significance of this new beginning. I was no longer defined by my past, I was a mosaic of experiences, each piece contributing to the woman I had become. I was ready to embrace the unknown, to take risks and seek out the joy that life had to offer. With a newfound sense of clarity, I made a promise to myself. I would actively seek moments of joy, allowing them to fill the spaces that had once been occupied by doubt and fear. I would create new memories with Emily, exploring the world through her eyes, cherishing the simple pleasures of life. As I walked back home, my heart swelled with excitement for what lay ahead. I envisioned a future where laughter echoed through our halls, where love filled the air, and where both Emily and I could flourish. It was time to step into the light, to embrace the fullness of my existence, and to honor the journey that had brought me to this very moment. In the weeks that followed, I dedicated myself to nurturing not only my garden but also the relationships that mattered most. I reached out to old friends, rekindling connections that had dimmed over time. I sought out new experiences, whether it was attending art classes, exploring local markets, or simply enjoying a quiet afternoon with a good book. Each moment I shared with Emily became a cherished memory, a testament to our resilience and the bond we were cultivating together. I learned to savor the small things, like the sound of Emily's laughter filling the house or the way the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange as it set each evening. I found joy in cooking meals together, experimenting with recipes and sharing stories over dinner. I cherished our bedtime rituals, the way she nestled against me as I read to her, both of us drifting into dreams with smiles on our faces. The art of reflection became a part of my daily routine, an essential practice that kept me grounded. I took moments to pause, to appreciate the beauty of life unfolding around me. I began journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the pages as a means of understanding my emotions and charting my progress. Each entry became a stepping stone on my path toward healing, a testament to the strength I had discovered within myself. I had transformed my garden into a sanctuary not only for the plants but also for my spirit. It was a place where I could escape the noise of the world, where I could listen to the whispers of my heart. I often spent quiet evenings tending to the flowers, allowing the tranquility of the earth to wash over me. The garden became a reflection of my own journey, a place of growth, change, and renewal. I reveled in the beauty of each bloom, marveling at the way life flourished even in the face of adversity. I realized that I was no different. I, too, could thrive despite the challenges I had faced. As the days turned into weeks, I began to sense a profound shift within me. The shadows that had once loomed over my heart began to recede, replaced by a radiant light that filled my soul. I was learning to love myself again, to appreciate the woman I had become through all of the struggles and triumphs. I embraced the concept of new beginnings with open arms. I began to dream again, not just about the life I once had, but about the possibilities that lay ahead. I envisioned traveling to places I had always wanted to explore, sharing adventures with Emily, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. I started planning small weekend getaways, filling our lives with experiences that would nourish our spirits. We visited beaches, hiking trails, and charming towns, each adventure a reminder that life was meant to be lived fully. I wanted Emily to understand that the world was vast and beautiful, filled with opportunities for joy and discovery. With each passing day, I embraced the concept of reflections. I realized that the past would always be a part of me, but it no longer had to dictate my future. I was forging my own path, one that was rich with love, hope, and endless possibilities. In the quiet moments of reflection, I often thought about the future I envisioned for myself and Emily. I knew that it was filled with uncertainty, but I also understood that uncertainty was a vital ingredient in the recipe for a fulfilling life. With a heart open to new experiences, I was ready to welcome whatever came my way. As I lay in bed that night, I closed my eyes with a heart full of gratitude. The journey of self-discovery was ongoing, but I was no longer afraid. I had learned to dance with the shadows, to embrace the light, and to live each day with intention. I was Mina, a divorced mom, a gardener of dreams, and a believer in the beauty of new beginnings. And in that moment, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Chapter 14: The Price of Freedom. As autumn descended upon the town, a subtle change began to weave its way into my life. The leaves transformed into vibrant hues of amber, crimson, and gold, fluttering gracefully from the branches like confetti celebrating the end of summer. I felt a kinship with the seasons, each shift mirrored the transformations within me. It was a time of reflection, a time to embrace the shadows that had lingered, often unacknowledged, in the corners of my heart. In the mornings, the air grew crisp, and I found comfort in the rituals I had cultivated. Sipping my coffee on the porch, I watched as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the landscape. The world was awakening, each bird call a gentle reminder of the life that thrived around me. I often paused to breathe in the earthy scent of the fallen leaves, allowing it to ground me in the present moment. Yet beneath this idyllic exterior lay a deeper, more complex truth. As the days grew shorter and the nights darker, I felt a familiar heaviness settle over me. The shadows of my past began to resurface, and I knew I had to confront them, not as a victim but as a survivor determined to reclaim my narrative. The pain I had buried for so long was demanding recognition, and I could no longer ignore its call. I took refuge in my garden, where I had poured so much love and energy. The vibrant colors of the flowers stood in stark contrast to the somber hues of my thoughts. In that sacred space, I began to dig deeper, both into the soil and into my heart. As I unearthed the roots of the plants, I contemplated the roots of my own existence, how they intertwined with my experiences, my failures, and my victories. In the quiet moments of solitude, I allowed myself to relive the chapters of my life that I had tried to forget. I saw the images of a young woman filled with dreams, ambitions, and love, a woman who had once believed in the fairy tale of marriage and family. But as time wore on, that fairy tale had unraveled, leaving behind fragments of hope and disillusionment. I had lost a part of myself in the process, and now, I felt compelled to piece together the shards. As the wind whispered through the trees, I was reminded of the importance of vulnerability. I began to write in my journal, pouring my thoughts and emotions onto the pages. The act of writing became cathartic, a way to release the pent-up feelings that had weighed heavily on my heart. Each entry was an exploration of my past, a journey through heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately, resilience. I reflected on my marriage, on the moments of joy that had turned to sorrow. The laughter that once filled our home had been replaced by silence and resentment, and I had allowed it to seep into the very fabric of our lives. I realized that I had clung to the hope of what could be, rather than accepting the reality of what was. In doing so, I had lost sight of myself, allowing my identity to become intertwined with my husband's expectations and desires. In the depths of my reflections, I recognized that my experience was not unique. Many women, like me, found themselves caught in the web of others' dreams, sacrificing their own in the process. We were often taught to prioritize family over self, to be the caretakers of everyone's happiness while neglecting our own needs. I had played that role for far too long, and it was time to break free. Embracing the shadows meant confronting the painful memories, acknowledging their existence without letting them define me. I sat on the garden bench, surrounded by the beauty of nature, and began to visualize the healing journey ahead. It was as if I could see the wounds of my past illuminated in the soft glow of the setting sun, and I understood that healing was not a linear process. It would be messy, complicated, and sometimes painful, but it was necessary for my growth. In the days that followed, I embraced the art of self-compassion. I allowed myself to feel the weight of my emotions, grief, anger, and sadness, without judgment. I learned to treat myself with the same kindness I offered to others. The practice of self-compassion became a guiding light, illuminating the path toward acceptance and understanding. I began to explore activities that brought me joy, painting, hiking, and even attempting to bake new recipes. Each endeavor was an opportunity to reconnect with the essence of who I was, to celebrate the small victories along the way. I discovered that I had buried talents and passions that had been neglected for far too long. The process of rediscovering myself felt exhilarating, and with each brushstroke or culinary experiment, I felt a piece of my soul come alive. As autumn progressed, I found solace in the changing landscape. The world outside reflected the transitions within me, a constant reminder that life was ever evolving. I learned to embrace the uncertainty, recognizing that the beauty of life lay not in its predictability but in its surprises. Each day was a chance to begin anew, to write a different chapter in my story. The connection I shared with Emily deepened during this time of reflection and growth. I made a conscious effort to engage in activities that fostered our bond, creating moments of joy and laughter. We spent weekends exploring nature trails, collecting leaves, and watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky. Each shared experience became a thread weaving us closer together, fortifying our relationship against the storms of life. As Halloween approached, the excitement in Emily grew palpable. She adored the festivities, carving pumpkins, creating spooky decorations, and choosing the perfect costume. I joined in her enthusiasm, relishing the joy that radiated from her as we prepared for the holiday. It was a reminder that despite the challenges we faced, there was always room for joy and celebration. The night of Halloween arrived, and our home transformed into a haven of ghoulish delight. We adorned the porch with flickering candles and cobwebs, the scent of roasted pumpkin seeds filling the air. As darkness fell, the neighborhood came alive with laughter and excitement. Emily dashed from house to house, her laughter echoing like music, and I stood at the door, my heart swelling with pride. Watching her immerse herself in the spirit of the night, I felt a surge of hope for the future. I understood that life would always be a blend of light and shadow, and it was in embracing both that I would find my strength. The journey was ongoing, but I was learning to dance with the shadows, to allow them to coexist with the light that now illuminated my path. As the night came to an end and Emily returned with a bag full of treats, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. I had navigated through the darkness, emerging into the light with a newfound understanding of myself. I was a mother, a survivor, and a woman unafraid to embrace her truth. Lying in bed that night, I closed my eyes with a heart full of hope. I understood that the shadows would always be a part of my story, but they no longer had the power to define me. I was embracing the fullness of my existence, ready to step boldly into the future that awaited me. Chapter 15: A New Dawn, A Distant Hope. As winter settled into the town like a thick, white blanket, I found myself in a familiar place, both comforting and confining. The holidays were approaching, a time usually filled with laughter and joy, yet I felt an unsettling mixture of anticipation and anxiety. My heart ached with the memories of Christmases past, when my home had been filled with the sound of laughter, the aroma of baked goods wafting through the air, and the sparkle of decorations hanging from every corner. I longed for those moments, but now they felt like ghosts, haunting the present with echoes of a life that once was. The days grew shorter, and the cold seeped into the very marrow of my bones. I could feel the weight of solitude pressing down on me, a constant reminder of the absence that lingered in my life. I ached for connection, yet felt a paralyzing fear of opening myself to the possibility of hurt. It was a cruel irony, the very thing I desired, a warm embrace, was also what terrified me the most. Emily, with her infectious spirit, was thriving in the anticipation of the season. She reveled in the magic of it all, excitedly talking about Santa, gifts, and holiday traditions. Watching her was a bittersweet experience. On one hand, her joy was a balm to my soul, on the other, it magnified the chasm that existed between us. I often felt like a bystander in my own life, trying desperately to catch up with the fleeting moments that were meant to be shared. As December unfolded, I made a decision. I could not allow the weight of my past to taint our present or future. I needed to embrace the holiday season for what it was, a time for creating new memories, regardless of the shadows that lingered. So, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the challenge ahead. The first step was to decorate our home, transforming it into a festive wonderland. I rummaged through the attic, unearthing boxes filled with ornaments and decorations. As I carefully unpacked each item, memories washed over me. Each ornament told a story, a Christmas spent in laughter, the joy of a child's delight, moments frozen in time. I hesitated, but I refused to let the past steal my present. With every ornament I hung, I began to feel a shift within me. The act of decorating was more than just a task, it was an act of defiance against the darkness that threatened to engulf me. I hung the twinkling lights along the eaves of the porch, watching as they glowed like stars against the night sky. The transformation was exhilarating, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope igniting within my heart. As Christmas approached, I made a conscious effort to involve Emily in every aspect of the preparations. We baked cookies together, filling the kitchen with sweet aromas and laughter. I watched as she flourished in her excitement, her face lighting up with every sprinkle we added to our creations. In those moments, I realized that I was not just doing this for her, I was reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost in the shadows of my divorce. We created our own traditions, from movie nights featuring holiday classics to making handmade decorations that adorned our home with a personal touch. Each moment became a thread weaving us closer together, reminding me that family could be defined not by traditional norms but by love and connection. In the soft glow of our home, I found solace. As Christmas Eve arrived, a fresh blanket of snow covered the town, transforming it into a magical wonderland. I bundled Emily in layers of warmth, and we ventured outside, her laughter mingling with the crisp winter air. Together, we built a snowman, our faces flushed from the cold, our hearts warm with the shared joy of the moment. I felt alive, truly alive, for the first time in months. When we returned home, I could see the twinkling lights reflecting in Emily's eyes, her spirit radiant with anticipation. I poured us hot cocoa, the steam rising in gentle tendrils, and as we settled in front of the fireplace, I allowed myself to revel in the warmth of our small but cozy family. In that moment, the past faded into the background, and I focused solely on the joy that filled the present. As midnight approached, we hung stockings by the fireplace, filled with treats and small surprises. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me. I was not just a divorced mom navigating the challenges of life, I was a woman reclaiming her narrative. The journey had been painful, yes, but it had also been transformative. I had learned to rise from the ashes of my past, to embrace the lessons it had taught me. When Christmas morning finally arrived, the sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow throughout our home. Emily bolted out of bed, her excitement contagious, and I watched her, a smile stretching across my face. The chaos of torn wrapping paper and delighted squeals filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of belonging. As I observed her immersed in the joy of the season, I realized that the essence of Christmas was not about the gifts or the decorations but the connections we forged along the way. It was in these moments of love, laughter, and shared experiences that I found my true purpose as a mother. I understood that the shadows of the past would always exist, but they no longer had the power to dictate my happiness. Later that day, we visited the local shelter to donate some of the gifts Emily had received. I wanted her to understand the importance of giving back, to know that true joy comes from sharing our blessings with others. As we handed out presents to the children at the shelter, I saw the light in Emily's eyes grow even brighter. In her joy, I found my own. That Christmas marked a turning point in my life. I understood that embracing my past did not mean being defined by it. I was determined to create a future filled with love, hope, and connection. I would not allow the pain of my divorce to overshadow the beauty of the present. Instead, I chose to celebrate every small victory, every precious moment shared with my daughter. As winter melted into spring, I carried the lessons of that Christmas with me. The darkness may have lingered, but it was no longer a shroud covering my existence. I had learned to navigate through it, to dance with the shadows while allowing the light to shine brightly in my life. And as I continued my journey, I vowed to be the kind of mother who embraced the complexities of life, who would teach Emily the importance of resilience and love. The road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with challenges, but I was no longer afraid to walk it. I had found my voice, my strength, and most importantly, my place in the world.